Hello, my name is Jax Williams, and today I'll be presenting on my topic, the Gilded Age, and I'll be talking about the importance and significance of this era in American history. What is the Gilded Age? The Gilded Age was a period in the United States where the nation became more prosperous and there was a growth of materialism. There was an unprecedented economic growth in the industries, as well as technologies being rapidly produced. With these rapid production rates, the entire economy prospered. Although the economy and industries were doing well at the time, there was an abundance of greedy and corrupt politicians that treated their workers with little to no respect. This had eventually led to laborers being stuck to fight for their rights against these corrupt political and economic figures. Many people refer to the Gilded Age as the culmination of the Industrial Revolution. This is because in many ways it was. Before this revolution, most Americans worked as farmers and artisans to provide for themselves and their families. However, with this rapid growth of the Industrial Revolution, this quickly changed. Industry started to become a priority over simple farmers, to the point where there were more factories and industries than farms. Farmers desperately tried to stay financially stable, so they were forced to ditch their lands to move into cities, where they were able to find factory jobs. Since farmers were forced to live more urban and so rapidly, many families were forced into these poor living conditions in crowded spaces. If you look at the picture on this slide, you will see one example of many of these living situations. They lived in small shacks and were crowded with big families, and as you can see, it's not a very stable living condition. There were only a few mansions built during the Gilded Age, and those were mostly constructed by the corrupt political and economic figures at the time. For example, the Vanderbilts and Henry Flagler both built multiple mansions and multiple properties while using their workers' money to do so. During the Gilded Age, the average American was not considered an industrialist. They were considered a working class American. The small amount of industrialists were thriving off their blooming businesses, while their workers suffered through terrible living and working conditions. These workers were severely underpaid for the amount of labor they did in a single day, while their employers enjoyed a non-labor intensive day, racking in the money that their workers were bringing in. Since most Americans started to get tired of the way they were being treated, there were people who referred to themselves as muckrakers. Muckrakers were reported who used journalism to expose the corruption among politicians and the economic elite. This was the start to the rise in many workers' unions and social movements in the United States. If you look to the left, you can and look at the image, you can see many average Americans, working class citizens, fighting for justice. All they're asking for is justice, as you can read on their sign. In fact, there was a short novel, The New England Nun, by Mary E. Wilkins, that describes the inevitable struggles of a married couple during the Gilded Age era. Louisa had waited for her husband for over 14 years to return from making a fortune in foreign land. However, she had finally been alone for so long that when her husband returned, she felt no more love, and he felt the same way. She ends the novel with Louisa sat prayerfully numbering her days, like an uncloistered nun. This is significant because it demonstrates the sadness that Americans had been going through, as well as shining a light on the idea of progressive movements such as women's civil rights. It shows us that wealth was significantly more important than true love, while also showing us that it is okay for women to not have a husband and do what makes them happy. On the topic of progression, the Populist Party was one of many major social movements that was able to accomplish many things for the people of the United States. The Populist Party, also known as the People's Party, fought for the rights of workers. They eventually created the Omaha Platform, which was a statement setting out the basic tenets of the populist movement. They asked for such things as graduated income tax, shortened work hours, improved working conditions, and more. Even more importantly, according to Joel Schrock, the author of the informative book The Gilded Age, the populist movement would set a pattern for future reform rights. One of the movements they helped jumpstart was the women's suffrage movement. This group of men and women banded together to fight for the equality of rights for women. They had fought for equal voting rights, fought to have a political voice, and the 19th Amendment. These movements were eventually accepted by society, implementing the amendments and truly taking steps towards equality. The populist movements faced its struggles from the economic elite, but had pulled through and inspired hundreds of other social movements making moves for equality. This era in American history was truly significant and still impacts Americans to do the right thing until this day. Here are my references, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.